Hi, Freddie. I'm back, and I'm going to read chapter 8 to you today. If you remember, what happened in chapter 7 is that they all went into the wardrobe, and they all start looking around, and then they realized that Edmund had kind of said something that made them all realize that he's actually been there before. Um, so Peter was yelling at Edmund, and then Edmund, they were following. They went to the fawn's house, and they found the cave, and they found out that he was actually taken by by the princess, the queen. She took them, the witch, and because he was did treason, and we so they followed a bird to where they thought that they were following a bird, and then all of a sudden the bird um, flew away, and then they saw this beaver, and this beaver was trying to get them to help them with finding the fawn and taking care of the fawn. Um, and then they talked about the fawn giving them supper and stuff like that. So they were no longer hungry. Um, so that's where the fawn had just fed the beaver had just fed them. So that's where it pretty much left off. And chapter 8 is entitled "What Happened After Dinner." So let's see what happens after dinner. Just a second, I want to put my thing there. And now, Lucy, do you please tell us what happened to Mr. Tennyson? Oh, that's bad, said Mr. Beaver, shaking his head. That's very, very bad business. There's no doubt he is taken off by the police. I've got that from a bird who saw it done. But where has he been taken to? Asked Lucy. Well, they are heading northward when they were last seen, and we'll all know that that's what that means. No, we don't, said Susan. Mr. Beaver shook his head in a very gloomy fashion. I'm afraid that means that they're taking him to her house, he said. But what will they do with him, Mr. Beaver? Gasped Lucy. Well, said Mr. Beaver, you can't exactly say for sure, but there's not many taken in there that ever comes out again. Statues, all full of statues, they say it is. In the courtyard and up the stairs, in the hall, people she's turned. He paused and shuddered. Oh, turned into stone. But Mr. Beaver, said Lucy, can't we? I mean, we must do something to save him. It's too dreadful, and it's all on my account. I don't doubt you'd save him if you could, dearie, said Mrs. Beaver. But you're no chance of getting into the house against her will and ever coming out alive. Can't we have some strategy? Said Peter. I mean, can't we dress up as something and pretend to be, oh, peddlers or anything, or watch till she's gone out, or oh, hang it all. There must be some way. This fawn saved my sister at his own risk. Mr. Beaver, we can't just leave him to have that done to him. It's no good, son of Adam, said Mr. Beaver. No good. You're trying for all people. But now that Allison is on the move, oh yes, tell us about Allison, said several voices all at once. For once again, that strange feeling, like the first signs of spring, like good news, had come over them. Who is Allison? Said Susan. Allison, said Mr. Beaver. Why, can't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood. But not often here, you understand. Never in the time or his father's time. But the word has reached us that he has come back. He is in Naria at this moment. He'll settle the White Queen. All right. It is he, not you, that will save Mr. Tennyson. She won't turn him into stone too, said Edmund. Lord loves you, son of Adam. What a simple thing to say, answered Mr. Beaver with a great laugh. Turn him into stone? If she could stand on her 2 feet and look him in the face, it'll be the most she can do, and more than I can expect of her. No, no, he'll put all to right as it is, in an old rhyme in these parts. Wrong will be right when Allison comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, shall sorrows will be no more. When he has his teeth, winter meets its death, and when he shakes his name, you shall have spring again. So they'll have spring again as soon as Allison comes in and corrects the queen. You'll understand when you see him. But shall we see him? Said Susan. Why, daughter of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'll lead you to where you shall meet him, said the beaver. Is he a man? Asked Lucy. Allison a man? Said Mr. Beaver sternly. Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the woods and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who the king of beasts? Allison is a lion. The great lion. Oh, that's where we get the lion in the wardrobe. Okay. I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there is anybody who can appear before Allison without their knees knocking, they're either braver than the most of, or just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe? Said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver is telling you? Who said anything about safe? 'Cause he isn't safe, but he is good. He's the king, I tell you. I'm longing to see him, said Peter, even if I do feel frightened when it comes to the point. That's right, son of Adam, said Mr. Beaver, bringing his paws down on the table with a crash that made all the cups and saucers dance. And so you shall. Word has been sent that you are to meet him tomorrow, if you can, at the stone table. Where's that? Said Lucy. I'll show you, Mrs. Beaver. It's down the river, a good step from here. I'll take you to it. But meanwhile, what about poor Mr. Tennyson? Said Lucy. The quickest way you can help him is by getting to Mr. Allison, said Mr. Beaver. Since he's with us, then we can begin doing things. Not that we don't need you to, for that's another of the old rhymes. When Adam's flesh and Adam's bones sits at chair Preval in throne, the evil time will be over and done. So things must be drawing near their end now that he's come and you've come. We've heard of Allison coming into these parts before. Long ago, nobody can say when, but there's never been any of your race here before. That's what I don't understand, Mr. Beaver, said Peter. I mean, isn't the witch herself human? She's like us to believe it. She'd like us to believe it, said Mr. Beaver. And it's on that she bases her claim to be queen. But she's no daughter of Eve. She comes of your father Adam's. Here, Mr. Beaver bowed. Your father Adam's first wife. They call her Letha, and she is one of Jen. That's when she comes from on one side, and on the other side she comes of the giants. No, no, there isn't a drop of real human blood in the witch. That's why she's bad all through, Mr. Beaver, said Mrs. Beaver. True enough, Mrs. Beaver replied. Uh, replied, there may be two views about humans, meaning no offense to the present company. But there's no two views about things that look like humans and aren't. I've known good dwarfs, said Mrs. Beaver. So I've now, so I now you can speak. So I know you can speak of it, said her husband. But precious few, and they were the ones least like man. But in general, take my advice. When you meet anything that's going to be human and isn't yet, or used to be human once and isn't now, or ought to be human and isn't, you keep your eyes on it and feel for your hatchet. And that's why the witch is always on the lookout for any human in Naria. She's been watching for you this many uh, this many a year, and if she knew there was four of you, she'd be more dangerous still. What's that to do with it? Said Peter. Because of other prophecies, said Mr. Beaver. Down um, at Sar Preval, that's the castle on the sea coast down at the mouth of those rivers, which ought to be the capital of the whole country if all was as it should be. Down at Car Preval, there are four thrones, and it's a saying in Naria's time out of mind that when two sons of Adam and two daughters of Eve sit in those four thrones, then it'll be the end, not only of the White Witch's reign, but of her life, and that is why we had to be so cautious as we came along. For if she knew about you four, your lives wouldn't be worth a shake of my whiskers. All the children had been attending so hard that Mr. Beaver was telling them that they hadn't noticed anything else for a long time. Then, during the moment of silence that followed his last remark, Lucy suddenly said, I say, where's Edmund? There was a dreadful pause, and then everyone began asking, "Who saw him last? How long has he been missing? Is he outside?" And then all rushed to the door and looked out. The snow had been falling thickly and steadily. The green ice of the pool had vanished under a thick white blanket, and from there, the little house stood in the center of a dam. You could hardly see whether either bank. Out they went, plunging, uh, plunging well over their ankles into the soft new snow, and went around the house in every direction. Edmund, Edmund, they called till they were hoarse, but the silently falling snow seemed to muffle their voices, and there was not even an echo in the answer. How perfectly dreadful, said Susan, as they at last came back in repair. Oh, how I wish we'd never come. What on earth are we to do, Mr. Beaver? Said Peter. Do? Said Mr. Beaver, who was already putting on his snow boots. Do? We must be off at once. We haven't a moment to spare. You'd better divide into four search parties, said Peter, and all go in different directions. Whoever finds him must come back here at once. And search parties? Son of Adam? Said Mr. Beaver. What for? Why, to look for Edmund, of course. There's no point in looking for him, said Mr. Beaver. What do you mean? Said Susan. He can't be far away yet, and we've got to find him. What do you mean when you said that there is no use looking for him? The reason there is no use looking for him, said Mr. Beaver, is that we know already where he's gone. Everyone stared in amusement. Don't you understand? Said Mr. Beaver. He's gone to her, to the White Witch. He has betrayed us all. Oh, seriously. Oh, really, said Susan. He couldn't have done that. Couldn't he? Said Mr. Beaver, looking over hard at the three children, and everything they wanted to say died on their lips, for each one felt suddenly quite certain inside that this was exactly what Edmund has done. But will he know the way? Said Peter. He has been in the country before, said Mr. Beaver. Has he ever been here alone? Yes, said Lucy, almost in a whisper. I'm afraid he has. And did he tell you that he's what he'd done or who he'd met? Well, no, he didn't, said Lucy. Then mark my words, said Mr. Beaver. He has already met the White Witch and had joined her side, and had been told where she lives. I don't like to mention it before, that being your brother and all. But the moment I set eyes on that brother of yours, I said to myself, treacherous. He had the look of one who had been with the witch and eaten her food. He can always tell. You can always tell them if you're living long in Naria. Something about their eyes. All the same, said Peter, in a rather choked sort of voice, we'll still have to go and look for him. He is our brother, after all, even if he is rather a little beast, and he's only a kid. Go to the witch's house, said Mrs. Beaver. Don't you see the only chance of saving either him or yourselves is to keep away from her? How do you mean? Said Lucy. Why, all she wants is to get all four of you. She's thinking all the time of the 4 thrones at Car Privel. Once you're there, all four inside her house, her job would be done. And there'd be 4 new statues in her collection before you'd have time to speak. But she'll keep him alive as long as he's the only one she's got, because she'll want to use him as a decoy, as a bait to catch the rest of you with. Oh, can no one help us? Whined Lucy. Only Allison, said the beaver. We must go on and meet him. That's our only chance now. It seems to me, my dear, said Mrs. Beaver, that it is very important to know just when he slipped away. How much he can tell her depends on how much he's already heard. For instance, we started talking of Allison before he left. If not, then we may do very well, for she wouldn't know that Allison has come to Naria, or that we are meeting him, and will be quite off her guard as far as she's concerned. I don't remember his being here when we began talking about Allison, began Peter, but Lucy interrupted him. Oh, yes, he was, she said miserably. Don't you remember? It was he who asked whether the witch couldn't turn Allison into stone, too. So he did, my dove, said Peter. Just the sort of thing he would say, too. Worse and worse, said Mr. Beaver. And the next thing that is this. Was he still here when I told you that the place of meeting Allison was at the stone table? Of course, no one knew the answer to the question, because if he was, continued Mr. Beaver, then she'd simply sleigh down in that direction and get between us and the stone table and catch us on our way down. And in fact, we shall be cut off from Allison. But that isn't what she'll do first, said Mrs. Beaver. Not if I know her. The moment that Edmund tells her that we're all there, she'll set out to catch us at every this very night. And if he's been gone about half an hour, she'll be here in about 20 minutes. You're right, Mr. Beaver, Mrs. Beaver, said her husband. We must all get away from here. There's not a moment to lose. Wow, that's really interesting. So now they're set off to go. Now they know that Edmund has deserted them, that he has gone to the witch. And so now they're off to find the lion.